Welcome everyone to our Life Leaders Coalition podcast. We're so pumped that you joined us today. I have a very special guest with us on the day. Her name is Knowles. She works with the Riverside Project, which is an incredible ministry and service for people, for organizations all throughout the foster care system. And the name is really indicative of what they're doing. And I wanted you guys to hear from her, because the way that their organization is serving those in the foster care system is unique. I've not heard of anyone taking this approach before. So I wanted to introduce her to you. Maybe she would help you with some ideas. Maybe you can connect with her and her organization and bring what they're doing locally there to what you're doing as you're trying to make an impact in the family sphere of culture. So if you guys would welcome her on. Amber, it's good to see you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, tell us a little bit about the Riverside Project, who you guys are, and what it is that you're looking to do in culture.
Yeah, well, we're in the Houston area, and there is no river in Houston. So it already is a little bit intriguing to understand why we would call a project serving families the Riverside Project. But we would say that there is actually a river going through the city of Houston. It's just a metaphorical river, and it doesn't look the same way in our minds that a river would. But this river is more so a picture of vulnerability and a picture of vulnerable kids and families in particular. And so really it comes from this parable about a river that you may have heard before, but essentially just imagine that you and two of your friends come upon this raging river, and there are children and families in the water just rushing down the rapids toward a waterfall. And so, of course, you jump in and you start pulling as many kids and families out of the rushing waters and onto dry ground, trying to stabilize them there on the shore. But knowing that there's this waterfall downstream, you send one of your friends downstream to catch those that are getting past you so they don't go over that waterfall. And then you start thinking, why are kids in the river in the first place? And so you want to send somebody upstream, and they start running upstream to find out what is putting kids and families in the water in the first place. And so you're all going in different directions, but you're essentially attacking the same problem. There's kids and families in the water, and we have to get them out. And so this is kind of this vision that we have to really engage the church, to engage the community, to engage businesses and individuals to find their place along that river. And we are trying to give them the tools that they need to pull kids and families out of the water of vulnerability to really stabilize them on the side. And so we're working kind of all over the city in different ways to help mobilize our community, both churches and community partners, to really know how to do that well and how to do it together.
That's powerful. So you mentioned this concept of finding your place along the river, and you kind of went through that. So what does that mean in practical terms? Because, when I think of the foster care system, the immediate thing that comes to mind for me is being a foster parent.
Right.
But the way that you're talking about it, it's as though maybe that's the crisis point or the crisis issue where kids need to be rescued in that moment. But then you're presenting this in such a way as that there are other issues or other places that you can get involved. What does that mean, finding your place along the river?
Yeah, so we would say that foster care as a system, or the child welfare system, is kind of situated midstream of this proverbial river. But foster care as a system is not an isolated problem that we see in our city. It's actually really closely connected to a lot of different social issues. So upstream, we see lots of different issues that cause kids to be separated from their families through the foster care system. So we see things like homelessness, we see poverty, we see lack of education, crisis pregnancy. Poverty is actually the leading indicator for kids going into foster care. So we can't deal with foster care without also recognizing the reasons why kids end up in foster care. And then downstream, we see many of the same social issues that happen when kids and families aren't either restored and stabilized, or kids don't find healthy placements and connections to loving, stable adults and communities. So we see many of the same things downstream. We see homelessness again. We see poverty again. It's where we see a lot of incarceration. The rates of people who are incarcerated who have spent time in foster care is really staggering. Same thing for trafficking. Foster care is a pipeline into human trafficking. So there are all these connection points where, yes, people need to foster. Yes, we need to find homes for kids who are in foster care, but it's not all we should do as a community. We have to also understand how impacting poverty and impacting homelessness and impacting trafficking really also impacts the foster care system. And so if we can find a place, any place, right? We shouldn't all do the same thing, but we can all find a place to intervene and to use our resources and steward them somewhere along that river so that families get healed.
That's really powerful, to that concept, to consider that, for instance, what you said with the fact that you have the sex trafficking issue that really stems back to this issue. And then what you're saying to me is, if I want to get involved in the foster care system, I can have an indirect impact on it, not necessarily becoming a foster parent or even working directly in the foster system itself, but literally other places, to whether it be if the passion of my heart or the organization that I'm a part of, or maybe our church is serving, for instance, you said people that are that are at risk, maybe because they're in poverty or something like that, that literally this whole thing is a web that ties together. And people have never, I've never thought of it in those terms. You guys described it as almost this lazy river that's a cycle, that when people fall into this river or whatever, that once they come out of the foster care system and become adults, they are just as likely to reproduce that whole cycle again. And so that was a really powerful concept. So and I loved what you said about that you can find your place, because sometimes what I've seen with a lot of initiatives that cities try to put together, or maybe multi-church organizations try to put together, they try to get everyone to do the same thing. And it's as though people don't want to cooperate, not because they're uncooperative, but that is not necessarily the passion of their heart. What you guys are doing is enabling people, literally, as you described it, to find your place, or almost find your passion in the place that you say, I want to make a difference here, and you can connect and get involved there. How are some of the ways that you guys work in this cross-relational, cross-agency type setup, to where you're pulling people in and coordinating between these different agencies? What are some things because I felt like that was unique about you guys as well.
Well, the way that we really execute this project, I come from a medical background. I'm a nurse practitioner. So I've kind of been trained to think through this in terms of, right, we assess a situation. I have a patient come into my office, so I assess what their symptoms are, what's going on in their body in these multiple systems, to get what I see in front of me. And then we kind of diagnose it, and then we start to treat it. I'm really big about, you get those mixed up and you end up hurting people, or are just ineffective, right? What you're going to prescribe is not going to work if it's not actually meeting the needs of that problem. And so we are very data-driven as an organization. We use a lot of data to really understand a community before we start to put a bunch of Band-Aids on different things. So one part of it that I would say is that we value taking a really good assessment. We actually broke, as you know, Houston is very large and complex. So the needs in one part of the city just don't match the needs in another part of the city. And so it would be really ineffective for us to engage and equip the church toward a particular treatment, if you will, or a particular thing to do if that's not the need in that community. We have to tailor the assets and the resources toward meeting the need that actually exists. And so we do a lot of work on the front end to help the community know first what's happening in this community. Is this more of an upstream focus? Or a lot of kids being removed from their homes because of poverty or homelessness or addiction? Then we really need to mobilize there first and then figure out where those gaps are. Is this a community where there's a lot of foster families and they need to stabilize those families and get trauma-informed care and support groups and parent night outs? Then we mobilize the community there. And so it really has to do with getting the big needs, right? 4,000 kids in foster care, we can't tackle that one thing, but in your community, in your neighborhood, this is what the problem is. Let's zero in on that and then start making progress. The other thing I would say that we say a lot with our partners is this idea of really working to move our vision upstream always. Yes, there needs to be people downstream working there, but how do we solve these problems before they ever happen? And at least be thinking through that so that we're not putting a bunch of Band-Aids over problems. That gets us in a lot of trouble, and it may feel good, but ultimately what we're wanting in terms of renewal and restoration and human flourishing, it requires trying to solve those problems early and before they actually happen. So a lot of it is just working together, meet the need that's really there, and then do it in a systems approach that's preventative, not just reactionary.
That's an incredible concept, is the Upstream Concept. You had mentioned a book that you guys had referred to in there, and I started reading that book. I haven't finished it yet. But one of the things that it was interesting that the author talked about is that things that happen upstream are preventative in nature, and they're not nearly as easy to brag about as things that happen downstream. So when we react to a crisis, and we can say we handed out X amount of cases of water in this particular event, or we served X amount of meals at this event, that is a metric that can be put on a dashboard. But he talked about the fact that really where the work is that is most important is in the areas that you can't measure, because you can't measure what is prevented. Yeah. And that is such a powerful concept. And yet I think it's the call of those of us who want to be life leaders and want to engage in really a transformative work in culture, is that if culture transforms, then things that are happening will cease, or things that should happen that aren't will begin. And so those metrics are somewhat vague to measure, but it's a powerful concept to think about preventing rather than reacting and just bringing some type of rescue. So I don't know if you mentioned or not, I may have missed it, but did you talk about some of the agencies you work together with? Because I know that you're involved in Child Protective Services. I know that's one of the agencies that you're coordinating with. I know that you guys are working with local churches. What are some of the other agencies and organizations that you guys serve unique? I feel like when I talk to you guys, you're almost like a backbone or a coordinating agency between all of these different partners. Can you talk about some of the partners that you are involved with and how that interface works?
Sure. So we started primarily working in the child welfare space. That's why we got in. I'm a foster and adoptive parent. So being able to recognize, wow, there are a lot of gaps in this system. How do we start to move into those gaps and start to figure out innovative solutions? And so primarily as an organization, we had only kind of worked in child welfare. And so we do partner with the judicial system a bit. We partner with DFPS, which is our local kind of state organization, an oversight agency. So we do work with caseworkers and leaders to address some of the problems that they're continually seeing and say, hey, how do we work together to fix this? And a lot of that, I will say, requires they're doing the work on the ground. And so this is not, and I think for any organization trying to do something like this, the aspect of humbly stepping into that and being able to say, I want to learn from you, and how can we serve you on the ground, because your caseworkers are doing so much and you're trying to fix these systems in the community. We just want to help and serve you. It has developed a really, I think, at least from where I sit, a good relationship where they know they can count on us. We have a privatized child welfare system here in Texas. So we also partner with about 24 child placing agencies who are kind of private organizations that license and support and place kids in homes. And then we also work with a number of school districts because really the school district is where, if we're looking at preventative work, like we were talking about before, that's who has eyes on vulnerable kids and families before child welfare does often. And so if we can really equip the school district also and connect them with organizations that serve schools, then we are actually, again, able to kind of prevent kids from ever going into foster care. So we work in that space. We work with pediatricians as well. We work with a lot of behavioral health specialists. Trauma is a big part of this whole river. And so we have to make sure that we're working with professionals who can see people through the lens of their trauma and help them to process and resolve that and heal from that, rather than just through the lens of their behavior. And so we do a lot of work in the trauma-informed space, just with equipping the community to know how to respond well and respond in a healthy way, rather than accidentally harming just by, not meeting those needs. So there's not a lot of end to where we would partner. Anyone who wants to care for the vulnerable, we can partner with you to figure out a way to do that.
That is incredible. Again, there may be other organizations that are doing what you guys are doing. This is the first that I've heard. And when we first met you guys and I was able to hear what you're doing, I knew for sure that our church wanted to partner with what you guys are doing and be a part of the impact you guys are making. And I've just been kind of the guy that's telling everybody, you need to talk with these guys. They're doing an incredible thing. So about that, so I know that you guys are specifically in Houston. So what if I were a person that is interested in the scope of something that you guys are doing like this but I lived in another state or another country, are there resources that I can receive from you guys, or is there a partnership that we could do with you guys? What would that look like if someone wanted to just kind of get your best practices or to be a part of what you're doing and maybe multiply this in other areas?
Yeah, we're certainly willing to have the conversation. We have a resource page on our website where some of the resources that we provide for the community, they're specific to Houston mostly, but links to podcasts, specifically in the child welfare space, really. Different organizations across the city, those are all kind of there, but anyone can reach out to me and just learn more about what we're doing. I would say the first step, and if there was someone wanting to replicate what we do, it's learning, like spend some time understanding your community really, really well. We're always learning from organizations. We're always learning because again, our city is so vast and complex that we're learning so much from CT Church and what you guys have seen on the ground in the Pasadena and Southeast Houston area. We can't just step into that and expect that we know what it's like and what the needs are in your neighborhood. And so I would say as a first step, know who the players are, know who's doing the work, and come alongside them and say, hey, what can we do to help? How can we fill in the gaps? We've seen in our community that the biggest gap has been pulling people toward one another. Honestly, that's the bulk of what we do. We provide resources here and there, but really, if I had to point out, the main thing that we do was filling in a gap to pull organizations toward one another and give them a space to work together. We don't do anything that is like incredibly complex. I mean, some of the workings of how we make it happen in a big city is complex, but ultimately, at the end of the day, we're pulling people towards one another and giving them space to collaborate and coordinate their efforts. That's really it. And so any way that you can do that, if it's a need, if there's someone already doing that, come alongside them and figure out what the gap really is. So yeah, that's what I would say is just the first place to start. And if we can provide any help for that, we're willing to help you out.
That is really amazing and powerful. Just the concept you talked about being an organization that pulls other organizations together. That is such a big deal. And that's what we're all about as the coalition, is we're trying to bring a space of collaboration where ideas can be shared, best practices can be put forth, because the goal is, of course, to see the goodness of God displayed in every part of culture. And wherever that is, that would show up, that the goodness of God would show up. And it's so important to have this non-competitive attitude to realize there's way more than enough for everyone to participate in, but pulling people out of silos. And that was one thing that was a big part of us as a church organization, is for us to be pulled out of a silo and to begin to engage with other people in our community, both Christian organizations, non-Christian organizations, just people that are trying to do good in our community, and saying, how can we come alongside you and help that effort? And we found that rather than having to create something, there was plenty to do that other people were needing help to do. And we could just come alongside and partner where there were already good works happening. As we're kind of wrapping up, I wanted to ask you, do you have like any stories, maybe struggles or success, that you want to just kind of share some of the highlights of some things that have happened since you guys have initiated what you're doing?
Yeah, I think one of the ones we keep sharing with one another and reminding each other of, as a staff, has been honestly one that CT Church has been a part of. And he didn't ask me to say this, everyone. It truly is. He's not paying me any money to say this. But it really has been. I think we had just had a conversation about, everything that this is about, maybe in the first couple of weeks of meeting you guys. And a church in the northwest side of town reached out to us, and they had met a need for a family, but they knew it wasn't enough. And we train all of our church partners to say, hey, the need that comes through to you is the tip of the iceberg. Yes, meet a tangible need for a family, but that's not what's going to plant them on the side of the river. They're going to end up falling back down into the water if we're not offering community to them and offering long-term, support. And so if you can connect them to a longer term, like see their needs and connect them, or find out how you can connect them. And so this church had done that. They said, hey, we provided this, but this is a family that they really are going to need some long-term support. They live on the southeast part of town. So we do you know anyone down there that can, we can tag team and hand them off to someone in their neighborhood? And I said, I have the church for you. And I called Nick and I said, I know it's Christmas Eve, because I think it was Christmas Eve or the day before, I can't remember. But I said, I know it's, this is a difficult time and churches are busy, but I have a family that really, really needs some help. And it was a 19-year-old girl who is now having custody of a 9-year-old and 2 12-year-olds, and who are just family members of hers. And it was incredible the way that you guys stepped in and provided not just tangible support around her, right? Like we hadn't even done a training with you guys, but you already instinctively knew we can provide this type of support. But now she has, job readiness, and now we're helping to get her counseling and meeting those needs and seeing the needs beneath the need. And so that has been a story that we keep going back to, of just, this is what it's meant to be about. Multiple churches working together, multiple organizations working together to see to it that families are flourishing and thriving in our city. And so, yeah, it's been a huge encouragement to us.
That's incredible. And yeah, I did not ask for that highlight. That wasn't what I was expecting, but we're grateful to be a part of what you guys are doing. And I just want to say, as we close this out, thank you, first of all, Amber, for being on today. Thank you for taking time out of, I'm sure, a very busy schedule. Thanks for being with us. And I just want to encourage us all, like the Riverside Project is all about the foster care system and finding your place along the river. I think the same can go for every single one of us. As life leaders, there's a sphere, there's a place, whether it be a river or an area of influence, that we have an opportunity to show up and do good works, to manifest and to display the goodness of God wherever we are. And so as you go about your life, let's do good works and let's make an impact in culture around us. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today. We hope to see you on our next episode.